So, hi, my name's Marcus. I'm from Australia. I've been living in Latvia for 13 years.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Mara. How you
How
doing?
are you doing?
Good, good. Nice to see you. Lovely
Yeah,
background. Lovely weather you're having in your
thank
background.
you. Yes, I thought in celebration of spring, get a little bit
Yeah,
sunnier
yeah.
in the backgrounds. Got
It's here
some
finally.
Riga
Yeah.
landmarks on either side. But yeah, thanks for joining us today and telling us a little bit about your journey from Australia to Latvia.
No problem.
Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, the place, and just memories that you have from when you were young.
Okay, so I grew up in a city called Geelong, which is down in the southeast. It's the second biggest city in the state of Victoria, behind Melbourne. It's about an hour southeast of Melbourne. It's located on a bay, and I actually had to check this. It's about 250,000 people now, but it probably was smaller when I was growing up there, I imagine. So it's a nice city. Um, Melbourne is like currently 5 million, so it's a lot smaller. So it's kind of a bit of a backwater compared to Melbourne. Um, and people say it's a great place to raise a family.
Mm.
So yeah, so Melbourne is where you go if you want to do anything exciting, especially when you're young or going to university. You want to be in Melbourne, but yeah, it's a nice place. I think it's about the same size as Riga in terms of square kilometers,
Hmm.
but it's got about a third of the population, so it's a much more spread out. It's suburbia basically. The whole thing is suburbs. So single family houses, front yard, backyard,
Is it
garage.
right next to Melbourne? Like, does it feel like a suburb of Melbourne without offending the people that live there?
No, that's offensive. That's offensive to anyone from Geelong. Look, it's an hour drive basically from the
Okay.
centre of Melbourne to
So
the
then,
centre of
no.
Geelong, but the suburbs are growing so much that they're
Hmm.
almost touching now. So,
Ah,
so
yeah.
yeah, um, and the reason people know Geelong or have been to Geelong is because it's between Melbourne, where tourists go, and the surf coast, the kind of beaches on the south. Bell's Beach being the famous one. So we're half an hour from the surf coast, the beaches. So yeah, um, and my childhood, what I remember, it was great. uh, I had a very peaceful childhood, I guess. We lived in the same house. My parents still live in the same house that they built after getting married on a hill. Um, kind of view over Geelong, and yeah, you walk down the hill for, let's say, I don't know, 500 meters. There's a river. You can walk along the river. Watch out for snakes during summer. They come out onto the path. But yeah, it was a nice place to grow up. A very quiet, kind of safe place. I imagine. I used to walk to school and ride my bike to school. Um, so yeah, it's typical Australian city. I guess because we're down south. Also, it's not as hot as people imagine. I mean, it gets up to 35, 40 degrees some days in the middle of summer. But yeah, during winter, it can get down to like 5 degrees or something like that. So it's most of the time it's, I guess average around 25, something like that.
Hmm.
But
So
yeah,
it's
so
not maybe quite as tropical.
not at all, not at all. Yeah. So Sydney or say up in Brisbane or Queensland, you get the tropical weather, you get the heat, but and the humidity, but we have, very dry summers. So yeah, it's not the extreme Australia. So,
Hmm.
but,
Awesome. And what, this is maybe an odd question to think about, but what are the things growing up, especially now that you are away from Australia, that you can identify feel particularly Australian? Either things you did as a kid or things around how you grew up that feel
yeah.
to like connected to that place?
It is a difficult question. I don't know. It's hard for me to compare because, you know, like since being abroad, I haven't really been involved. I mean, I don't have children, so I'm not kind of very well connected to the life of children, say in Riga. So it's kind of much harder for me to compare that sort of thing, how people grow up here and how people grow up in Australia. But I mean, you know, Australia thinks of itself as a very sporting country, and I mean, I don't know how it is in other countries, but you know, my childhood was filled with sport. Even though I'm not very sporting at all, I'm hopeless. But of course, I played cricket, I played tennis, I did gymnastics, I rode my bike everywhere. I was a scout, which isn't really sport, but it gets you outside and you do all these activities. So I remember, we just didn't have much time in the day because you'd finish school and then you'd go do sporting activities. On the weekend, you'd go and you'd play the sport. You play the cricket match or something, or school sports or things like that. And I guess I will mention at some stage, but I'm one of 5 children. So there was a lot of sport and a lot of sports runs and driving around in the car and dropping people off and picking people up. I don't know if there's a similar thing happening in Latvia, but yeah, I know it seems very Australian that you finish school and then you go straight to the cricket club and play cricket, and then the next night you're doing something else. But yeah, apart from that, it's, I don't know, it's kind of this feeling that I have of, I guess, the amount of space and the greenery, and it's just a different sensation I have to living in Riga, where I'm kind of surrounded by big buildings, and narrower streets. And this Australia just seems to be, probably like some parts of the States as well. It seems very open and spread out and big. I don't get that feeling in Latvia.
Yeah. I think another way to maybe think about it is what are the things about Australia that you would point out to someone who had never been there, who asked you about what Australia is like?
All right. It's not as dangerous as people think. That's one I have to try to stress.
Meaning the animals and all the things that can kill you.
Yes. It's very unlikely that you'll get bitten by a snake or even by a crocodile, especially if you spend most of your time in the city. One thing I did think was that it's more diverse than people think. That I mean, possibly people think about the nature and everything. It's diverse. It's it's a huge country, so from one side to the other, it's very different. But also, I guess in the culture and the population, because we're such a country of immigrants, basically, apart from the Indigenous Australians who've been there for centuries. But I think a lot of people kind of have the image of an Australian as a tall, blonde-haired surfer guy with bulging muscles and that sort of stuff, which I never quite fit into. But it's such a multicultural country, and it's been shaped by so many different groups coming during different periods, that it's such a it's far more diverse place, I guess, than people imagine in their minds. And so for growing up, my friends were from parents from all over the place, from all different countries, which was perfectly natural. So what else would I stress? That's all I've got for now.
Yeah, well, that's a good amount.
Good. It's a difficult question.
It's interesting. You think about it more when you're living somewhere else, but at the same time, it's not easy to boil down an entire childhood, an entire country down to a feeling. And so it's interesting kind of what things pop out to you in particular moments. And you gave us some of those. So talk about when you started traveling or started thinking about having your first experiences being outside of Australia.
Okay, it's hard to say when I like got the idea that I'd like to leave Australia, but I guess there is this kind of rite of passage for Australians, which has been around for ages, which is, you take a gap year generally after finishing school, and you go to the UK and you work in London normally or somewhere else, and then you spend a year there. Maybe you do a bit of traveling, and then you come home.
And specifically England, specifically
It
UK?
doesn't have to be, but yeah, that's
Common.
the obvious
Uh-huh.
choice. Yeah. So I don't know. It just seemed to be a thing that everyone wants to go back to the motherland, despite the fact it's not really the motherland. But yeah, so I did the same thing when I finished university. I finished school, sorry, earlier. When I was 18, I took a gap year and I spent 8 months working in school camps in various parts of the UK, and did 1 month traveling, and probably about 10 countries. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I was 18, I was young and naive, um, you know, first time away from home, and generally a lot of drinking. And we had a great time, but I think I kind of felt like I wasted that opportunity, because it's a big thing to go from Australia to Europe. It's expensive. It's like 24 hours or more flying, and so um, I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that I'd like to go back and try again, but this time maybe make a better hash of it, and maybe a bit older, a bit more money, and a bit more streetwise.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle, I guess, influenced me a lot as well, because he was the exotic uncle who was living in New Zealand and then Switzerland and then Papua New Guinea, then Samoa, then the Solomon Island. Just moving from place to place, working, and he'd come back and bring us all these exotic toys, and he was my hero when I was young. He wasn't married for a long time, and so that became my goal, to be like my uncle and travel the world and not get married. So I failed on one of those accounts, and he's married as well. Worked out, but yeah. So I don't know. I had this kind of the dream to travel, from I guess an earlier age. But yeah, I think this first kind of not failed attempt, but the first attempt kind of made me want to go again and try more. So yeah, and so when I finished university, it seemed like another good time to take a gap year, which never stopped. I'm still on my gap year at the moment, so it's
That's
going
wonderful. A
quite
gap
well.
life.
Yeah, yeah, gap life, exactly.
Um, yeah. So talk about that. Was it a conscious decision that you were going to live outside of Australia, or was it something that started as another gap year that rolled into not going back?
When I left, the kind of excuse I had for going abroad was to do work experience. So there was this cultural, technical exchange. So that you'd be given a position in a different country, and yeah, you'd be sent over there. You could apply through this organization, and they'd find a position for you. And then you go and work there for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, just depended on the company and the contract. Um, and so my idea was I wanted to go to Europe, and I basically said, send me anywhere in Europe. I'm not really that fussy. I didn't really have a country where I was dreaming of going. I just thought, I'll go and work in Europe for a bit, and then I will travel until my money runs out. So it was kind of at the beginning, the idea was open-ended, but I didn't plan on living here. But kind of, I guess, when I left home, I had finished my university. I hadn't, got into the workforce yet. I was single. Um, didn't really have any commitments, so I thought, I can just kind of leave it open ended and see how long I go for. And yeah, it went on a lot longer than expected. So after 3, 4, actually probably close to 5 months in Macedonia, I started traveling, and I kind of decided to go east because it was a bit more unknown. I I guess I'd seen Paris or, Rome or something on television. I had a kind of idea in my head, but I, had no idea what Belgrade or Budapest or Kiev were like. So I was like, well, I'll go there and find out. And I discovered that you can travel very cheap if you get rid of your hospitality expenses. So maybe you've heard of couch surfing.
Mm-hmm.
Couch surfing. So I joined couch surfing and started using that. Then I discovered hitchhiking, so I didn't have to pay for tickets from place to place anymore. And so I managed to keep going until I ended in October in Latvia, in Riga. And I met some nice people, and they happened to know someone who owned a hostel. And so I said, can I have some work and some accommodation? And they said yes. And so I stayed here for 6 months. And during that time, I met my wife, my future wife, I should say. And that kind of changed things a little bit, because then kind of decided maybe I'd like to stay a bit longer over here. And it also kind of, maybe it was too easy. The fact that I just stayed in Latvia for 6 months, it kind of gave me a false sense of how easy it would be just to live over here. So so maybe that's when my brain kind of switched, and I was like, oh, maybe I want to stay in Europe for a bit longer. But yeah, it wasn't never really conscious. That was a very long answer to your question. Mm-hmm. Not really a conscious decision to move abroad. It's just kind of one thing led to another, and kind of apart from my family, I really had nothing pulling me back to Australia. Nothing which I had to be back for. Kind of going, really should go and do that. So.
And how long was this period of time between when you first landed in Macedonia and kind of popping around until you said, maybe I'll stay in Latvia a bit longer than
that would have been just over a year.
Okay. So you traveled for about a year before you ended up in Latvia and met your future wife and thought, maybe I'll settle in. Can you talk about how the start of actually settling into being in Latvia felt different from your actual travels the previous year?
Well, I guess the main difference is that, the traveling was kind of a suspended, it's basically suspending your life. Mm-hmm. You don't have any worries. Your worry is basically, where are you going to sleep? What are you going to eat? And how are you going to get from city to city? Those are the three things you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about a job. You don't have to worry about bills. You don't have to worry about, even friends or things like this, because every, week you're in a different city or something like this. So you're still a tourist, essentially. You are just a different sort of tourist, because maybe, you're not going from hotel to hotel or something like this. You are going from someone's house to someone else's house, and from someone else's car to someone else's car. But, that was probably one of the happiest years of my life, I would say, because it was every day something new. It was kind of nonstop. Some people do it. Some people do it forever, but for me that was maybe enough. Maybe I was kind of ready to kind of take a break and stay down, because it was kind of like, I don't know, being nomadic. Basically, you don't have a home. You just have a backpack on your back, and you don't really know where you're going to sleep, how long your money's going to hold out, or anything like this. So, yeah. And then once you arrive in Latvia, then you kind of begin to, get the benefits of having a fixed life. You can make friends, and you can meet those friends again and again. But at the same time, you have to worry about job and where you're going to live and pay your rent and so on and so on. So, yeah, it was a wonderful year. I'd like to do it again. Actually, we did do it again. Kind of in New Zealand, me and my wife in a van, but yeah, it's kind of I don't know. I've lost my thought. Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah, they're totally different experiences and totally different ways of living.
I'll come back to Latvia in a second because we'll talk
Yeah.
more about your life here. But I think you're the first person that we've talked to that has had this kind of a traveling, couch surfing, hitchhiking experience. And so I just want to touch on that just a tiny bit more for people who are interested in maybe dipping their toe in exploring other cultures, even though it's a little bit different than living somewhere. So can you maybe share some of your thoughts, tips, things to think about or prepare for, and maybe how you were able to make your money and time stretch as long as you did?
Yeah, it's an interesting subject to be talking about now, especially because I mean the idea of traveling is kind of
Mm-hmm.
sounds very exotic, and the idea of letting strangers
Maybe
into
we'll
your
get back
home.
to it at some point.
Yeah, we hope. Yeah, I'm so glad I discovered it because it gives you just a totally different insight into where you are inside into the country. I mean, you have total strangers take you into your house, and you know they're normally young people, but not often. Sometimes families, sometimes older people. So you kind of already have you've met a local. I mean, you know, this is one of the hardest things to do when traveling. Often is to kind of get out of this. I mean, hotels you don't meet anyone except for the you know the staff. Maybe in a hostel, the youth hostels, maybe it's more likely you'll be able to interact with local people. But it is kind of difficult to get get yourself into the kind of I guess social part of the city or the country where you are. And so, kind of by doing this couch stuff, and you've already got a leg in. Let's say you've already got a way into that. You can ask questions. You can cook food for them as as a thank you, and of course they'll say try this drink. It's our national drink or something like that. So you already have this kind of communication. And I met some really, really amazing people through that. Some people actually I'm still, good friends with, or been to weddings of, and things like this. So it was, just a nice way to meet people. But it's not for everyone, I guess, because you end up sleeping in some very weird places. Sometimes people's front doors don't work. So you have to climb in through the balcony, things like this. Sometimes someone says, I have to go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning. So you have to leave with me. So you're out on the street at 7 o'clock every morning. Sometimes you're sleeping in on the floor or somewhere like this. So it's obviously not everyone's cup of tea, but I mean, I did it, of course, because I wanted to save money. It was the cheapest way to travel. You get free accommodation, but at the same time, it is a great way to, the simple way of saying it is to engage in cultural exchange or something like this, to meet a local person and to be able to talk to them freely about things. And of course, when we started living permanently in Latvia, we hosted people here as well. Because it's kind of like a karma thing. You can't just go and stay on people's couches and never give anything back. So of course we have people come to us. And I mean, that's also great because you can't travel, the whole time. You have to work sometimes. So you can work, but you can have, people coming into your house. You can show them your city and, you have conversations. They can tell you about where they are. Maybe sometime you'll go and visit them in their city, but it's this kind of constant exchange. And I kind of started to look at hitchhiking the same way as well. It's, it is kind of like getting a free ride somewhere, but a lot of the times I'd be picked up by businessmen who are driving, or truck drivers, very common to get a lift in a truck. And these are people who are driving a lot and they're bored and they've got no one to talk to. So they pick you up and, your part of the deal is engage them in conversation and they take you from one point to another. And so, it's not just simply trying to get things for free. It is actually some sort of exchange. Even though it's not monetary, there is some other part of it. So yeah, if people haven't tried it and they're kind of willing to put their faith in humanity, because I think it's kind of something you need to do. You kind of have to just blindly trust everyone with some exceptions. I mean, sometimes, you're not going to hop into that car, or you're not going to write to that person or something like that. You don't feel comfortable, but most of the time you are just, kind of blindly putting your faith in the person who's giving you a house or giving you a lift in their car, or vice versa. You pick someone up. So yeah, you have to have a kind of faith in humanity to do it, I think. But it's worth it if you do.
Yeah, and it sounds like almost like something in between from a typical I'm visiting a place and staying in a hotel or a hostel and just seeing the interesting sights of that place, because you're right, it is very, very hard traveling and even living somewhere that's not your hometown to
Yeah,
meet
exactly.
people. So it
Yeah,
feels like this interesting in between that I think especially to a lot of younger people, but also to a lot of adventurers and people who want to get out and see the world. It's an interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
So you're in Latvia. You decide, okay, maybe I'm going to stay a little bit longer than I planned. I had this 6-month opportunity, but then you met your future wife. What did some of that initial time look like in terms of adjustment to settling in? And by that, I mean some of the logistical things that you had to accomplish, and maybe some of the shift in thinking that you needed to go from traveling and couch surfing to actually saying, okay, I'm going to settle into a place.
This is the bit I don't want to talk about, because then we start to get into the realities of life and immigration, which is never the best topic to discuss with anyone, I think. It was. I mean, that period I spent, the 6 months I spent in Latvia, it didn't really feel that different, to be honest. I'd been traveling for there's no kind of culture shock or anything, because I'd already been traveling for so long, and I kind of felt, that I knew the culture, but it just kind of was like, I was kind of, I guess, prepared for anything. So if someone said, no, we this strange thing, you're just like, okay, yeah, that's fine with me. Why not? It wasn't anything cultural. And I think also because I was working in a hostel, I was, hanging around with a lot of people who were working in the hostel business, and, then of course a lot of travelers. It kind of was just an extension of that kind of couchsurfing idea, that kind of, instead this time I was the person welcoming people, telling them what to do. I mean, I knew nothing about Riga, but you knew, the basic questions, you go to eat here, or, this is cheap food, or, this club is dodgy, don't go there, that kind of thing. So it didn't really feel that different. I know, that was just kind of a 6-month kind of break, what I thought would be a break in my travels. So it wasn't a huge step there. It's only when I kind of decided to come and live permanently in Latvia, and try to live permanently in Latvia, that I had to go through these things of getting a job, and going to immigration and getting the visa and all of this sort of thing. And that's when the kind of reality of it hits you. So then I had to deal with all these issues, which got worse and worse. And that was when the dream started to turn into a bit of a nightmare, I guess. But we persevered, we got through it, and finally they gave me a visa. Man, they haven't kicked me out yet. So, that period, it was kind of mid 2008 when I kind of moved back to Latvia, because I'd kind of been here, I'd left, I'd lived other places, and then decided to move back, because me and my girlfriend / future wife kind of decided that we had to be in the same country, and Australia was too far away, so I tried to live in Latvia. And then immigration problems, and fast forward, and everything's okay.
If you had the ear of Riga city government, not even necessarily on the Latvian national level, because then you get into some complicated laws, but maybe more in terms of integration versus immigration. What
Mhm.
are things that, having been in Latvia for a significant period of time now, you would maybe recommend might help the experience of someone, coming to Latvia and trying to adjust and live here?
Oh, yeah, any sort of integration program would be great. The obvious one is the languages, and I mean, I thought, I've had problems myself. I'm still learning Latvian after 15 years, and they offer free language classes through the city. But of course, then you apply for them, and they're all full, or they either answer back and say we don't offer classes for English speakers.
Hmm.
It's kind of, if you're not a Russian speaker, then you can't learn Latvian. This kind of, I think, is the mentality of the government, that immigration is people from Russia. They haven't kind of caught up with the idea that there are people from other countries who are coming here, and not just to work, because, possibly, and this is why I don't like to call myself an expat, because I don't feel like an expat. I'm not here for work. I'm a classic immigrant. I stole a job, and I stole a woman, and you know uh, that sort of thing. So um, yeah, I think they kind of think, a lot of the foreigners coming from Europe, or even from Australia or New Zealand or somewhere, or the States, they're either foreign Latvians like yourself, or they're, people who are just here to work in business. And that any proper immigration is coming from Russia, and it's just kind of, aimed at teaching them some Latvian, and the rest of the people, ourselves, is kind of ignored, or that don't even know we exist, possibly. I have had no offers of any. I mean, it's a bit late for me now. I moved here, 13 years ago, but yeah, no offers of like any sort of support, any help. And I mean, I'm fine, because I have a wife, I have a family, who can help me here. But if you're coming here without any of this, support, if you don't know anyone, then I don't think there's anything really for people that I know of. Maybe it's changed, maybe it's better, but
Hmm.
the fact, I mean, I contacted 1 year ago about these language lessons, and got this reply that no, we don't offer lessons for English speakers. Just kind of made me laugh. It just seems so stupid. So yeah, it's obviously, that anyway is still a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, whether I'd use these, integration services, I'm not sure, because kind of, I think it's, I think you learn enough. I don't need to integrate now, but I think, yeah, something like that, some help, and where to go to, get a doctor or something like this, would have been quite useful when
Hmm.
I arrived. So yeah, but if I had Riga's city council's ear, I probably wouldn't talk about that. There's other things,
Well, now
more.
that you're Regan, there are probably lots of other things you'd want to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, I think.
And interestingly, I saw about, I don't know, 6 months ago, not quite a
Mhm.
year ago, I think Riga actually put out something in Latvian, Russian, English, and maybe German,
Oh,
about, that was kind of like the first I've ever seen that was like an
mm,
attempt at a integration document,
okay.
where I think it may have partly come out of being for repatriants, so for Latvians returning
Hmm.
to life in Riga,
Yeah.
but the way it was written was really applicable to anybody moving to Riga, and
Mhm.
it was this treasure trove of information that had
Mm,
different sections about different topics, and how to do those things, and who the contacts were, and websites and things like that. And I think um,
okay. Yeah.
that's the first I've seen of that. It would be, I mean, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about it, but I think it's something that someone put or a team of people put a lot of work into, and it would be nice to also see that actually distributed and
Yeah.
given to folks who need it,
Yeah.
rather than just being kind of maybe announced in Latvian because none of
Yes.
the
Well,
Latvians who speak Latvian necessarily need it.
yeah.
But it would be
But
nice.
it has to be in the state language, of course. That's very important. Even
Yeah.
if it's for people who don't speak the language, you still have to have it in the state language. But
Yeah.
I look, a lot's changed since I arrived in 2008. Started living here permanently. Then there was nothing in English, almost nothing. Even reading the news, there was no English language Latvian news service or anything like this. I think things are changing, especially around the pandemic. Obviously, they've realized that they need to release the information at least in 3 languages, if not more, because they've understood. So I guess these things are changing, but yeah, I think, and I think there's probably some really good organizations, but they're probably quite separate from the government or the immigration office, who would be the perfect people to be distributing this useful information. They know who's coming and who's a new arrival. But yeah, hopefully.
So what are some of the things that and maybe this has changed over your time here, but what are some of the things that stand out to you about that feel particularly Latvian? So what are some of the cultural things that you encountered, that either things that you really liked, of like, oh, like I'm down with the way they do this, or this thing that seems really important here, but also challenges, things that felt really different from the way you were used to doing things?
It's a boring answer, but I haven't really found anything which has been challenging. I think Latvia is a European country. It's there's not really any customs or things that disturb me, or I find troubling, or they can't deal with. The small differences, but this is kind of what makes living in a different country interesting. These kind of changes. But is this one thing that kind of that I liked about life here? I guess 2 things. I mean, I used to say, because I got this question a lot when I was a tour guide, because they'd say, "Are you from Latvia?" "No, I'm Australian." "Oh, why are you here?" Because of course, a lot of people have the dream to go and live in Australia. It's like their dream country. They're too scared of snakes to actually go, but that's their dream. They can't understand why I would live in Latvia. It's quite hard
You
to
talk about
explain.
locals are asking.
No, no, no.
Not
Oh,
understanding.
both.
Okay.
Tourists. A lot of tourists would be, "But why are you here?" And locals also often would ask the same thing: "Why are you living in Latvia when you could live in Australia?" But yeah, there's one thing I really liked about Latvia when I first arrived, which was in the middle of the financial crisis. When I was stuck in London getting my visa. Waiting. I was sitting and reading the newspaper and came across a tiny little article, at the bottom of page 7 or something, about the Baltics, which was quite rare to read about Latvia in the newspaper in the UK. And it said, "The Latvian economy has been declared clinically dead." I was like, great, hey, I'm spending time and money trying to get into a country where, the economy is crippled. But yeah, that kind of I found as a blessing, because it seemed like a huge reset from this kind of struggle to get independence through the 90s, and then like this boom of the 2000s, and then everything fell apart. And I think it allowed people to kind of pick up the pieces and kind of build something better out of what had come before. So it worked for me and some friends who set up this tourism company, and tried to create something new. And a lot of really nice kind of small businesses, or some which is still happening, came out of that. So it kind of seemed like Latvia had opportunity. So we set up a tourism business and later a bicycle tourism business. I kind of would compare that to if I was in Melbourne trying to set up a similar thing. There'd probably already be like 10, 20 companies doing exactly the same thing I was doing. There'd be a lot of red tape and things like that. And in Latvia, it just seemed like if you had a good idea, you had a little bit of money, you could create something, you could make something. And it seemed like the city, especially during this period, was changing. And I mean, city, I lived in Riga the whole time, so I can't speak too much about the rest of the country, but it seemed like things were changing. Every day was something new. In Australia, it felt like it was exactly the same as it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago. The economy was fine, everything was fine. There hadn't been any troubles. Maybe something caught fire. Maybe there's a flood or something, some natural disaster. But everything was kind of just the same. Whereas in Latvia, it was evolving, it was changing, it was I'd say improving as well, so much from year to year that it kind of felt a bit more exciting. So that was one thing I kind of felt living here. That life was just a bit more exciting, in a good and bad way, I guess. And the other thing, I guess, which I would kind of stress is that I guess also connected to the trouble of the late Soviet period, the independence, the turmoil, the kind of economic instability, the shortages of goods and everything, that Latvia, and I guess, it's true for other former Soviet countries as well, I'd say they stayed grounded, let's say, they stayed earth. Maybe not the right way to say it, but things which were kind of, disappearing in the West, connections to the land and to the food culture and to the traditions as well, I guess, kind of, disappeared. Whereas in Latvia, these things, kept, just through necessity, basically, were kept alive. So in Australia, in the 80s and 90s, we were buying frozen TV dinners and heating them in our microwaves, where Latvians were still like picking mushrooms and pickling things and, getting together what they could. So, I really kind of like this connection to, it's not stupid to say the old ways of doing things, but to doing things yourself.
Yeah.
Not going to the supermarket and buying things, going to the forest and picking them instead. And, this pickling and preserving and making stuff.
Some of the old way, because these are things that people have learned from their parents and their grandparents.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing is now that is coming back. It's becoming, you can go into the Rīga supermarket and buy like hipster made hemp butter, which is just something which, was always around, but now someone's put in some nice packaging and is selling it in Colosseum market or something like this. So, this was something that really, I really appreciated about the country. And it does help. I mean, that you can hop, you can go half an hour from Riga or less, and you can be in the forest with no one around. And, it's not like you have to drive for hours or, fight for it with a million other people. So, that's probably something, I don't know if it's underrated, but I don't know whether, I mean, Latvians obviously appreciate it because they're out there every autumn picking the mushrooms.
And know at least 100 different kinds.
Some of them know. Some of them call their mothers and say, "Is this one okay?"
Yeah. The tip that I learned from my great aunt when I was young is that you stick your tongue on the bottom of them, and if it's bitter, you don't eat it.
Oh, right. Okay. I haven't progressed that far.
Kind of the fool's simplistic version of don't eat it if it's bitter.
My one's even more simple. It's just like, I know that mushroom, I'll pick that mushroom. I don't know that one. No. And I think I know about 3 mushrooms. So
well, thankfully we also have mobile phones these days, and we can double check some of these things to a certain extent. But
and use GPS when you're lost in the forest.
Yes. Do you have any good stories about adjusting and living here, or just living here in general?
Good stories. It's hard to think of one which kind of would summarize it. No, it's. I mean, I've embraced this kind of access to nature, let's say, and I've done a lot of camping and a lot of hiking, and I've done bicycle, overnight bicycle trips and multi-day bicycle trips through the countryside. And I mean, there are hundreds of mornings when I've woken up by the sea or by the lake and just run into the water. And life is fantastic. It doesn't get any better than this. And there was also certain things like, okay, my famous one, of course, is Midsummer's, this idea of just a party because it's a long day and a short night. So let's all go to the forest and, dance around and get drunk. And, I felt like I, came the closest to being a Latvian when on one Midsummer's evening I was in a sauna, naked, getting whipped by a man with stinging nettles. And I figured that was about as close as I was ever going to get. Jumping in a ditch afterwards. I recommend it to everyone.
That does sound
fantastic.
very, very Latvian.
The stinging nettles, I don't think are Latvian. I think it was just his sadistic story.
Oh, stinging nettles are good.
Stinging nettles. Yeah, yes, that's what they say. Yeah, and I've discovered actually that there's a Latvian philosophy that is that, certain things are good for you, and they're generally the most disgusting. Or, cabbage juice, pickled fermented cabbage juice, very good for you. Birch juice. It's birch juice season. My mother-in-law was already offering me birch juice. And, it tastes like water, but you drink it because it's good for you. Or you leave it to ferment, and then it's rotten water. It's very good for you. All these things. Whipping with nettles, very good for you, very healthy. Yeah. So maybe that's why I feel so healthy. And Latvian delicacies I've been indulging in. But yeah. I can't think of a single story which kind of, other than getting whipped by nettles, which kind of describes the feeling of being in Latvia or becoming Latvian. But
I love that. I love that. So part of what you've done here for a while has been being a guide. Can you give your 1 minute punch list of what are the things people must do or see when they come to Latvia?
I get asked that question, and I generally say there's nothing. Latvia doesn't have must-see objects. I have a few favorite places and favorite things that I like to share with people. And, apart from, if it depends how much time people have. Most people are here for a couple of days, and they can't do the best thing in Latvia, which is, to go to the countryside and, wake up on a beach, or find a private beach where you look both directions and you can't see anyone at all, and or go for the sauna, go jump in a ditch, which I think essential parts of the Latvian culture. But I think there's a couple of things which are amazing. One of my favorites would be the Central Market, because it seems to be Latvia in a microcosm. It's a melting pot. You go there, and there's a special market word which I learned, which was "Lūdzu, pожалуйста," which is unique for the market, I believe. Please in Russian, please in Latvian, please in Russian. And it's where you kind of understand that Latvia is not as Latvian as you think it is. It's actually quite multicultural as well in its own little way. You can go to get your Uzbek meal, or your Georgian spices or something like this. There's a lot of kind of immigration that's come from these post-Soviet countries, and of course, it's where you're more likely to hear Russian in the market than Latvian quite often. And I have conversations with people at Stuff Off where I'll ask something in Latvian and they'll reply in Russian, and I don't speak Russian, but we just kind of, and they don't speak Latvian, but we can kind of make it work. And also it's just where you see you know, the good stuff of Latvia, especially in the middle of summer, all the berries, all the mushrooms, all the fresh fruit that comes locally. So that would be, if you want to see Latvia and you don't have time to see Latvia, just go to the central market. You get the food, you get the culture, you get the problems, you get everything. You can get some cheap cigarettes from Belarus, you know. So if you want. But, yeah, that if there was one thing. Otherwise, yeah, don't, you know, the House of the Blackheads. Overrated.
Which was rebuilt
and rebuilt
by the Riga City Council in, yeah, that's a different
1999 or something.
Yeah, we're not, so they could look at something very expensive and pretty. That's a conversation for a different channel.
yes. Well, that's back to the city. What I would tell the city council conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Last question before I ask your final thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've been here for over a decade, how do you grapple with the word belonging? Do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel like you're somewhere in the middle? Where are you at with this idea of having lived in a place and being part of a place for so long, but yet not necessarily being from this place?
I guess I established quite early. I mean, I can give an example because I also worked as an English teacher early on. And I remember in some of my first lessons, you know, just when I was starting in beginners English, and getting people to introduce themselves, and some woman saying like, you know, my name is Tatiana, I'm Russian. And I said to her, oh, you were born in Russia. She's like, no, I was born in Latvia. I was like, oh, so you're Latvian? No, I'm Russian. And, you know, then you begin to process and you understand, and you kind of realize that there's people in this country who are born in this country who, you know, don't really feel Latvian or part of this country. And so my feeling is also, you know, I don't know whether I could say I belong. I'm here. I've got I got my bubble. I'm very happy in my bubble. I really like the country. I really like the city I live in. I really like the people. I like the culture. But at the same time, I don't know whether I feel like I belong in the culture. Because being Latvian is such a I don't know, problematic identity in some ways. Because, you know, with that comes all this kind of problems we have in Latvia between, you know, Russian community, Latvian community, and of course people who are part Russian, part Latvian, and where do they kind of decide to put themselves and things like this. So I don't feel like I belong here. I feel always like I am, you know, Azimix, I'm the outsider. And it doesn't really trouble me. It doesn't bother me because I know I have my life and my bubble, and, you know, if someone tells me that, you know, you're not a proper Latvian, it's not going to upset me at all. But it's kind of I don't feel like I belong to the country, or the country belongs to me. It feels like it's just where I am at the moment. So yeah, it sounds a bit depressing, but I don't think I think about it very often, to be honest. Do I belong here? Well, you know, in my opinion, as long as I've got the paper, I've got the little card they give you now, as long as I've got that, then I'm okay. Maybe if I become a citizen, then I'll change my idea. But at the moment, you know, they can kick me out in 5 years or 4 years. You know, it's possible that when I go up for my next, you know, residency permit or permanent residency, that they'll say no, and I have to leave and my life is gone. So maybe until I am, you know, have my claws into the country or something like that, then maybe I won't feel entirely like I belong here. Yeah, I'm happy with that, with not belonging.
Any final thoughts?
I don't know. I think it's kind of important. I sometimes find it kind of important to stress that I like being here. And most people I know and who I'm friends with or acquaintances with, especially, you know, foreigners, but also the local Latvians. They're happy here. They're comfortable here. Latvia has a big problem with people leaving. Immigration, where we're hemorrhaging people. So, I kind of feel this necessity to stress. If it was on my tours or just general life, that I actually like this city, I like this country. Can list so many things that's wonderful about it. I mean, there's as many problems as there are, wonderful things, but that's any country in the world has its dark history and its problems and things like this. And I think, I don't know, sometimes I think people forget, that they're quite privileged to live in this country and, have everything we have here. We have clean water, we have unpolluted air, we have open spaces, we have beaches, we have all this nature. We live in a city which is so relaxed and calm. Obviously, not everyone has it easy. I mean, there's a lot of people who are struggling here, especially at the moment. But at the same time, this is a safe and very comfortable place to live. So yeah, that would be my thought. I appreciate Latvia. It's a great place. Not that Australia isn't, just hotter.
A lot hotter. And apparently more snakes.
More snakes, deadly snakes. Well, not deadly snakes, venomous snakes. But they say one person dies a year, so you have to be really unlucky to be that one person from snake bite. But yeah, I will say, like, just on the subject of that, I lived 25 years in Australia, never bitten by a snake once. I don't think, maybe a spider bite, but not a bad spider bite. Never got eaten by a crocodile or anything. And within 3 months, no, even less, of moving to Latvia permanently, 2008, I ended up in hospital for 30 days with tick-borne encephalitis. So Latvia, dangerous. Australia, safe.
Much more dangerous than Australia, apparently.
Yeah, ticks. And I also say I'd much rather meet a snake on a path than a bear. So, I can outrun a snake. I'm not sure I can outrun the bear. So, yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for sharing a little bit about yourself and about your story.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah.